Hello everyone, I'm Sahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here. Wow, I just can't believe that we are finally going to be reading the last chapter of this Canadian literature book that we have been reading, called Moon of the Crusted Snow by waubgeshig. It's been, it feels like it's been a sort of long journey, but it really hasn't been that long. It feels short and long at the same time, but I'm just deeply honored that you've just stick with me until the very end of this chapter series. I'm very happy that you've watched all my chapter videos, and if you're maybe this is your first time coming across any of my videos, please kindly watch the previous chapter series and videos on this book, as they just give you a better instinct and idea of what this book is about. Before like my other chapter videos, I like to give a brief intro slash summary of the book. And so before I start chapter 31, I sort of want to talk about Moon of the Crusted Snow. So Moon of the Crusted Snow starts with I was gonna sort of talk about the main characters, but I think I'm actually gonna do that when I do like my review about the book overall. So I actually will be making a slight short video on sort of like my overall review about the book. But right now, I just want to talk about the fact that we're reading about a small anishinaabe community that's located within the northern region of Canada. This small anishinaabe community is among the first nations slash group of indigenous people who have been in Canada for such a long time. They for so long have preserved their cultures, their traditions slash customs throughout centuries. And we read in this book about the language of the Anishinaabe people, the rituals, their customs, and sort of their necessity and their survival. The things they've done out of necessity in order to survive, and these things include hunting, fishing, giving back. It's their way of honoring their land, and it's their way of living and just having a sense of community. And so yeah, I always like to mention that. And another thing I like to mention is about the conditions they happen to be in, and how due to this unfortunate circumstance that they're in, human motives, human attitudes, human emotions have changed throughout the book. And just to go directly to it, in this book, they are currently facing a power crisis, in which is described as an apocalypse in the book, and it truly is an apocalypse. This community has been forced to make sudden changes in their lives. People are panicking. People are engaging into in violence, and people are dying out of unknown circumstances, but also due to hunger, due to certain deaths by outsiders, and just crazy things that have been occurring due to this period that they're in. and this obstacle they're currently facing. But yet we see that through this book, this community still has a strong sense of resilience. It's not been easy, but like the many um, years before what they're facing now and centuries before this, we read that this community has always been resilient. Firstly, against early colonization when white settlers tried to take their land, but even through just the hardships that they're faced throughout centuries, and within this book, the power crisis that they're facing is still not preventing them from still trying and still hoping, and having a sense of hope is so important because this community still tries to keep a sense of order. Community leaders are trying to make sure that they try to find solutions, even though there aren't necessarily any huge solution that or any sort of things they could use to resolve, you know, this unfortunate obstacle that they're facing. But yet they try, and I think it's the trying and it's the sense of hope, the love, and within families, and they just made this book just really moving for me. And there were also parts that made me deeply emotional, and reading about certain community elders dying, and certain just community members losing their life due to due to suicide, and just different things in the community that has occurred and continues to occur. And also, and in the last chapter, we see how actions, um, you know, is more vivid in a way through what happened um, when even Isaiah and Tyler. These are, by the way, one of a few of the characters. But now so you should know them if you are a returning um, supporter, and and so you probably know these characters. But yeah, they confronted an outsider, Justin Scott, who was a white man, who moved from his original city, which is Gibson, and it's a nearby city that's close to the close to this small community. And so they let him in, and unfortunately he wasn't a good person, and he did a lot of horrible things in the community. The worst one was, I think the most worst one was, you know, community members like even Isaiah and Tyler finding out about the fact that he was stealing bodies from the morgue where they kept the dead bodies, and basically cooking them and boiling them, and obviously to later consume. And that was like really horrifying reading about. And so he ended up dying after Megan Connor, which is also one of the characters within this book, shot him basically. And people have had several you know untrustworthy feelings about him, and just worry feelings about this outsider. And so he ended up dying. And honestly, I, as a reader, felt as though that needed to happen with all the unfortunate and just really wrong things he's done in the community, the things he said, and with them welcoming him in, and him later, sort of showing who his real self is, made me really realize that he wasn't a good person, and he deserved what he got at the end of the day. And I know it's not really kind to say that, but he really truly did. But to sort of just get into today's chapter, or before I get into today's chapter, I just want to talk about how this book has been really impacting for me. It's been really interesting for me, mostly just reading about the Anishinaabe people, the Anishinaabe Mawin language, um, the Anishinaabe, culture, and just seeing differences and similarities between sort of my sense of identity slash culture, my Nigerian culture, and the anishinaabe um, people's sort of sense of tradition. For example, I think one thing was about how education was something um, they felt as though was important in their families, and to make sure their kids got education. And I thought about my family. My Nigerian family has always pushed me to work hard towards getting an education because they knew how significant it is in this life, and it was interesting reading about that, and then just reading about the different ways they do things, having certain ways they honor the dead, their certain rituals, and I just thought it maybe reminded me of just the sort of African spirituality, excuse me. And so yeah, and it's really interesting reading about that. But I think I will talk more about that in the overview, excuse me, the overall review of the book, which I guess I could call an overview as well. So yeah, I would do that soon, and I will give a bit more details about my overall um, thoughts about the book. But now I will read chapter 30 in addition to um, an epilogue um, that sort of goes into detail about what later happened in spring. And so now I will read chapter 31. Okay. Chapter 31. The sun broke through the clouds, striking the snow as they dragged the sled past the abandoned northern. Months had passed since anyone had walked this way, so Tyler and Isaiah were forging a new trail in the heavy snow. Their arms burned as they dragged the body behind them, and sweat dripped from their noses. They said nothing, listening only to the sound their snowshoes made and the steady shushing of the plastic sled. No signs of life remained at this end of the community. The portal to the south was dormant and barren. The store itself lay in ruin, with the door agape and the windows smashed. Isaiah squinted to look inside but couldn't make out the empty shelves or anything else in the darkness. He turned his attention back to the patch in front of him and saw the small white ridge that led to the old service road just beyond it. Isaiah and Tyler reached the incline. Neither looked back to the body behind them. Their skin was ashen and dark bags hung under their brown eyes. Tyler wiped his brow on the arm of his jacket and tucked the straggling strands of long black hair behind his ear. Isaiah adjusted the beak of his ball cap. His ears were catching a bit of chill. He nodded at Tyler, and they summoned the strength to lift Scott's body to the top of the ridge. The snow was soft and would soon melt, so it was easy for them to dig it in slightly and bring it to rest. They could no longer ignore the corpse. They had grown to loathe the man in his short time in their community, but they pitied him in debt. No one would ever know what had driven him or what had brought him to their town. Now they felt only relief that he would be gone, a blip in the communal memory of this terrible winter. The friends looked at each other one more time, and Tyler gave the body a heavy shove. It slid slowly down the other side of the ridge. He looked away before it stopped, and both men turned to walk towards the community, the light sled skimming behind them. Scott's body slid over where Mark Phillips' still frozen corpse lay under a thick blanket of snow. It came to a rest in a slight dip in the snow. It was left to freeze in the waning weeks of winter, or waiting weeks of winter. And when the melt came, the crows and wolves would arrive for a taste of flesh. That is the end of chapter 31. So, before I get into the epilogue, I just want to briefly talk about chapter 31. So we read that in chapter 31, basically they bury Justin Scott's body after what occurred at his, what happened to be his home. And what occurred was that they found out about Justin Scott basically stealing bodies from the band council morgue, or the community's morgue, where they kept dead community members who had not been able to get a proper burial due to the season that they were in. And so they kept all these bodies in the morgue, but they noticed that a body was missing, and so even came up to the conclusion slash believe that Justin Scott possibly was the one who did it because of the certain things he previously said. And so they even takes initiative and or takes action, basically investigates and asks Isaiah and Tyler to come with him, and they go to his house and just find out that him and some other guys, including even his little brother Cam, who is just, if you've watched my previous videos, he's nothing compared to Even, and he's the complete opposite of Even. So it's not really surprising, unfortunately, that he was with Justin Scott. But anyways, we see that he had a lot going on. He had blood in his hands and on his overalls, and then when they did come there, they saw Justin Scott boiling something on a pot. And so when they look, they see what I pretty sure was the boilings of a dead body, and it was disgusting. And Megan Connor, I think I mentioned this in the intro, she shot him after he literally shot at Even when Even was trying to investigate what was going on and trying to calm everyone down. And that led to him dying. And now Even, Isaiah, and Tyler went to bury his body. And what the irony, or what actually kind of found interesting, was the fact that he later, his body was literally next to the person he killed, Mark Phillips, which was an outsider from Everston Mills who was trying to escape what he was going on in Everston Mills, because things escalated there, and people lost their minds and they were trying to escape, and they were hungry. But Scott thought this man was trying to attack them, and so he killed this man in front of his people. And yeah, so what makes this kind of funny is the fact that his dead body is next to the same man, and they add that crows and wolves would arrive for a taste of flesh. And in my head, I kind of laughed at that, but no, seriously, he deserved it. Sorry, y'all. We're gonna move on now. Anyways, oh, that's kind of cruel, but we're not always gonna like all the characters. So now I'm gonna read the epilogue. Spring, which in the Anishinaabe Moan word, I'm not sure I'm gonna pronounce this right, but Siguan. That's what spring is. Let's read. Okay. Nicole lifted her sunglasses and rested them on her head as she turned back into the house for one last pass through. The frames rested in the weave of the braid tied tightly against her scalp. She stood in the living room and gazed at the stripped down surroundings. The pictures were gone from the walls. The cushions had been pulled from the couch and the chairs. Anything wooden, such as a coffee or side tables, had long been removed. The large black rectangle of a television remained on the wall, but it had been 2 winters now since it flickered. She walked through the living room and into the kitchen where the absent cupboard doors exposed a small stack of dishes. The essentials had been moved out weeks before. All the kitchen furniture was also gone, taken out and stored for fire fuel. Nicole had done her best to ignore any nostalgia for this home she and Even had created for their family. The children were still young. They would forget, but the memories in this place were strong and lasting for her. She didn't know if they would ever return, but she had stored them. She had stored a small collection of mementos in a corner of the basement in case they would someday come back for them. Nicole stared towards the door to the basement to go down and sort through the pile one last time, but she stopped and shook her head. She had already packed 2 photo albums and made bundles for both Mygon and Nagons to carry on their journey to remind them of how their life once was. So she decided not to go back downstairs and left the rest of the pictures, baby toys, electronics, and other mementos in a pile under the white linen dress she never got to wear. She and Even had always planned to get married eventually, and she was going to wear her mother's wedding dress, but holding that kind of event made no sense now, and they'd never be able to mark an anniversary anyway. Still, she put her fate in the belief that this was not the last time she'd be in this place. She pulled her scratched sunglasses back down over her eyes and walked back out into the mid-morning sunshine. It gleamed on her bare brown shoulders. She shut the door behind her without locking it and stepped down the creaky stairs. Her kids and their grandparents waited for her in the driveway. Dan Whitesky leaned against the warm blue metal of Evan's old truck with his arms crossed, his red cap pulled low to shade his eyes. Nicole's father stood beside him, dressed similarly, but in different faded colors. They tied their long hair behind their heads with tiny strips of deer hide concealing the ponytails. Her mother, Teresa, stood in front of them, comfortable in her dirty gray t-shirt, tattered jean shorts, and sandals as the summer morning heated up. In the shade, on the grass on the other side of the driveway, Patricia Whitesky and 2 children threw a wobbly yellow frisbee back and forth. Nicole approached the truck. Teresa put her arms around Nicole without saying anything. They broke the embrace, and Nicole stepped back to lift her glasses and wipe her eyes. Almost on cue, the children ran up to her, not sensing anything wrong. She smiled and laughed as they each wrapped their arms around her legs. Mygon looked up at her. His long brown hair fell over his shoulders now, as long as his little sister's. 7 years old, the boy was growing taller. He had grown up so much since the lights went out nearly 2 years before, but his youthful exuberance remained intact. "Did you get my finishing rod, Mommy?" he asked. Yes, my boy, she replied. His joy and enthusiasm grounded her and always reassured her about their family's road ahead. Your tackle box, too. It's all in there. She motioned with her head to the to the packed trailer that the adults would take turns pulling into the bush. The structures they were leaving behind would likely stand for a few more generations. The homes were perfectly viable shelters from the cold and rain. The band office, the shop, and all the other community buildings would probably last even longer, and all the infrastructure would most likely still functional. But there was no use for any of it. Along with half the people who had lived there, the fledgling spirit that had been trying to nourish in this place had died. There was no use staying somewhere that had become so tragic. The bad memories and the sadness had smothered the good. So many people had worked so excuse me. So many people had worked so hard to sustain even in the wake of the darkness that befell them. And when it became clear to them that they were never supposed to last in this situation on this land in the first place, they decided to take control of their own destiny. Their ancestors were displaced from their original homeland in the south, and the white people who forced them here had never intended for them to survive. The collapse of the white man's modern systems further withered the anishinaabe here, but they refused to wither completely, and a core of dedicated people had worked tirelessly to create their own settlement away from this town. They also couldn't be certain there wouldn't be more visitors. None had come since the arrival of those from the south in those first scary months. But if civilized life remained in the cities and towns around them, the mass migration was likely already underway. No one wanted to deal with any more of them. Not now. Is my fishing rod in there, mommy? In there too, mommy? Asked Nagons, now old enough to know how to cast, or at least drop, a line into the water. You bet, my girl. Can we go fishing today? Probably. It wouldn't take us that long to get there. Yay! The 5-year-old started jumping up and down. Patricia put her hand on Nicole's shoulder. Well, you ready? As ready as I'm gonna be. Okay then, let's go. Nicole nodded and looked back down at her son and daughter. Okay, guys, she said. Let's go see Daddy. He's waiting for us. Dan lifted the hitch of the trailer and began pulling it around the house. The rest followed in single file. They went past the shack and the fire pit and the hid tanning rack in the back. They reached a clearing that led to a path through the bush. They stepped onto the trail, one by one, to begin this new life, nestled deep in the heart of Anishinaabe territory. They didn't look back. And that is the end of Moon of the Crusted Snow by waubgeshig. Wow. I actually really like the ending, and I huh, um, it's just after that, it's just acknowledgements that the author made. Um, but let's briefly talk about it. Wow, I really like the ending actually. I love the idea that this community basically decided to form and leave the previous society that they were in to basically form a new life, or excuse me, a new life for themselves. I found that beautiful, and I also want to mention the fact that they mentioned on how this community, from very early when white settlers tried to take their land from them, in the south, and basically putting them on this northern reserve, they weren't even meant to survive, but yet they thrived, they were resilient, and they were hopeful. And we see today in the community that they were able to survive, and their culture was passed down. So, the author waubgeshig including that towards the ending, and we obviously we've seen that through the book about how he talks about this topic, and I really found that beautiful, the idea of them surviving through all the obstacles. And I've also sort of mentioned about this, the sense of the resilience this community had is just truly moving, because especially with all the things that they're faced, especially in a condition like this, um, you know, how could they possibly, survive? But yet they really did. Not all did, but, for the most part, the ones that did are still trying, and not giving up, and still trying to find better for themselves. And I think that's so important as we journey through life. It's not gonna be easy, and it's gonna have challenges along its way, but just having that sense of hope, sense of resilience, sense of sort of still wanting to thrive despite all the hardships is just really important to have a better life, possibly. Not even possibly, to have a better life. I think these qualities are so important. And so I found it really beautiful that, Nicole McLeod and Nagons and Mygons and, their grandparents, excuse me, all are going to see even in this new community that they're formed for, their family and the anishinaabe community. Yeah, it's really beautiful how this small community has continued to keep pushing and thriving and finding better circumstances for themselves. And so yeah, I just found that really beautiful. Against all odds, they're still trying, they're still finding a way, and it's just really beautiful how the community sort of basically rise, or basically rose to find better for themselves. I think that's so beautiful, and yeah, thank you for watching this video. I definitely will go back through my book what do you want to call it, bookmarks or whatever you want to call it, my little book stickies, to sort of see the things that I felt were important to me, so I could highlight that when I do the overall review of the book. But I'm so excited that we basically sort of journeyed through this together. I'm also excited to do the video, and also very proud of myself that I was able to finish this book, and it was really meaningful to me. And this book would definitely be one I think will remain close to my heart, especially due to the fact that it was my first Canadian literature book. And it was interesting, and the fact that I read it during winter also made it much interesting. But yeah, I would definitely do a review. But yeah, by the way, I wanted to say thank you so much for sticking with me all the way to the end of this book chapter series. And I just love you deeply, and I hope you continue to support me as I, journey through this new YouTube channel pathway. I really will continue doing these fun, sort of chapter series. I recently went to the library and got a new book. I think I might be doing a chapter series on, depending on sort of what idea and how I want to do this one, because I do like to do things differently. And I'm still growing and stuff, and seeing how I want to sort of, I guess, build or sort of structure this account. But I'm not gonna think too much about that. I'm just gonna, do what I feel as though is right in a way, and whatever comes to my head, honestly. But yes, if you enjoyed this video, please kindly subscribe, like, and comment. I would really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. And I love you. I really do. And thank you for always supporting me. And yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.